I'm going to take a stab at explaining how to play modally, but instead of talking about modes as scales, I am going to try to find and show commonalities in using intervals. Intervals are pretty important, and once you get a firm grasp of what intervals are, it makes communicating so much easier. So when I'm speaking of playing with intervals, what I'm talking about is more of a numerical language than an alphabetical language. I'm going to go ahead and show this in G, for instance, but if I was playing G on the 6th string 3rd fret, that would be considered the 1, or the root of this area that I'm playing. An octave of that, there's the octave, so that's also considered 8 or 1 again. There's only a certain amount of notes that could possibly be between that root and that octave, and those are the intervals, and they are described in their relationship to the 1. So in this case, that would be 1, or the root. You have a minor 2, a major 2, a minor 3rd, a major 3rd, a perfect 4th, the tritone, the perfect 5th, the minor 6, the major 6, the minor 7, the major 7, and then the 8, or 8-1 octave. Now there are octaves of every one of those notes, and they would spill on, you could continue playing until you got to the 1st string. But within that 1 octave range, those are all the possible notes there could be. They could be played in other places, and if I chose to start that progression with my pinky and played, there would still be a minor 2, a major 2, a minor 3, a major 3, and so on. So in this particular lesson, I want to discuss the 7 modes of the major scale. And they are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and then it ends back up on Ionian again. So, you may or may not have known that in all of these modes, 3 of them are major modes, 3 of them are minor modes, and then all by itself is the Locrian mode, which is where a diminished triad or chord comes from. So you could think of the modes as they relate to each of the particular chords in a major scale progression. So since I'm going to stay in the key of G major, so you could consider the 1st chord of G major as a major chord built from the 1, the major 3rd, and the perfect 5th of the Ionian mode. The 2 chord of that progression is going to be the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the Dorian mode. The next chord is also a minor chord, and it comes from the Phrygian mode, the 1, the 3, the 5 of that Phrygian mode. The 4 chord is another major chord, and it comes from the Lydian mode, using the 1, the 3, the 5 of the Lydian mode. Then comes the 5 chord, is the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the Mixolydian mode. The 6th chord is the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the Aeolian mode. Then you have that Locrian mode, if you play the 1, the 3, and it will actually be a flat 5, which is why it gives it that funny sound. That's from the Locrian mode. You take the 1, the 3, and the 5, which is a flat 5, becomes a triad of diminished quality. And then the 8 returns back to the Ionian mode. So I just mentioned earlier that there are 3 major modes, there are 3 minor modes, and then there's the 1 diminished mode, which is the Locrian mode. And we'll put that one aside for just a second and examine the 3 major modes, which are Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. And then you have 3 minor modes, which are Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian. Now when you first started playing guitar, you probably learned the minor pentatonic scale first, because with that you could kind of jam out and make something that kind of sounded like music. It's very musical. But the reason that pentatonic scales are what they are, and we'll start with minor because it's easier to see since you've probably been playing it forever. If you compared the 3 minor modes, the Dorian, the Phrygian, and the Aeolian, they would all have a 1 or a root. They would all have a minor 3rd. They all utilize a perfect 4th. they all utilize a perfect fifth, and they all utilize a minor 7. So that's 5 notes out of 7 of a mode. So if you memorized those of the pentatonic minor scale in the terms of intervals, then you'd only be missing a 2 and a 6 to make the whole mode. So the 2s and 6s are different, and that's why they're not consistent in the pentatonic scale. They're not included. But if you, on the other hand, looked at the major pentatonic, you'd have 2s and 6s in there. So the notes that are in common to all 3 of the major modes, which are, again, Ionian, Lydian, and Mixed Lydian, they all have a 1. Got to have a root. They all utilize a major 2. They all utilize a major 3rd. They all utilize a perfect 5th. And they all utilize a major 6. So there's no 7 and there's no 4 because those intervals are different in those 3 major modes. So one of the ways to try to work on your modes would be to possibly think of them as the 3 major and the 3 minor. Thinking of the major as the major pentatonic scale and just figuring out what your different 4s and 7s might be between those. And then thinking about your minor pentatonic and your 3 minor modes and working on what your different 2s and 6s might be that are missing in there. But I kind of want to introduce even a completely different way to look at playing modally, and it isn't going to be playing an entire scale at all. It's going to be focusing on the individual intervals. So looking at your 2s, for instance, and trying to identify what your 2s might be through the whole progression. Then your 3s, your 4s, your 5s, your 6s, and your 7s. So this is how this is going to work. So I've come up with this chart of intervals as they relate to the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, the 6 chord, the 7 chord, and again the 1 chord of a standard diatonic major scale progression. And what I would like to do is start with the middle and looking at the 4s and the 5s, because 4s and 5s are very common intervals in all of the modes. For instance, the interval of a perfect 4th is in every single mode with the exception of the Lydian mode. The perfect 5th also is in every single mode except the Locrian mode. So as we go through the progression, you can assume that every 4 is going to be a perfect 4th until you hit Lydian, and in this case it's going to be a sharp 4, which is also known as the tritone. The same note can be referred to as a flat 5. So when you're looking at your 5ths, they're in every mode with the exception of the Locrian, and in the Locrian mode it's going to be that flat 5 or tritone. So we'll start off, we're going to go ahead and stay in the key center of G major for the duration of this lesson, but these principles fit any key really. So if you were to play the major scale or the Ionian mode in the key of G, you would consider it to be, 1, a whole step to the 2, a whole step to the 3, half step to the 4, whole step to the 5, whole step to the 6, whole step to the 7, and then half step to the 8-1 again. So I was just talking about 4s, so a perfect 4th from G is right below it. So that location, if you can burn into your mind, is a perfect 4th from any note, really. So if you were to come to the 2nd degree of the scale, which would be the Dorian mode, the perfect 4th would again be right below it. So root 4. If you go to the 3rd degree of the major scale, this now becomes the Phrygian mode, and the perfect 4th is right below it. The 4th degree of the Ionian mode brings us to the Lydian mode, and this is where the 4 was no longer perfect. It's a sharp 4. Okay? Moving up to the 5 is the Mixed Lydian mode, and it has a perfect 4. Then to the Aeolian mode, the 6th degree of the major scale, and building the scale there is the Aeolian mode, has a perfect 4th. The Locrian mode has a perfect 4th. And then returning to the 8-1 has a perfect 4th. So the perfect 4th is in every mode with the exception of the Lydian mode. So if you play that together, again, it's... Okay, and we'll look at the 5s are the same way. A perfect 5th from 1, okay, that should be a really memorable, in ear training, that's a very memorable interval. Now remember, I said the perfect 5th is in every mode with the exception of the Locrian mode. So, if that's the case, it's going to sound like... So it was played as a perfect 5th everywhere except for the Locrian mode. So a little exercise that's kind of handy to use to memorize all of your 4s and 5s is to play a 1, a 4, and a 5 of every mode, and then focus on just those 3 intervals. So we'll be going from Ionian to Dorian to Phrygian to Lydian to Mixolydian to Aeolian to Locrian and ending up on Ionian. And the 1, 4, 5 of each of those modes sounds like this. The next pair of intervals that I'd like to draw your attention to are the 2s and the 7s. And the reason that I like the 2s and the 7s next is just like 4s and 5s where there are a majority in most modes with exceptions, the same goes for the 2s and the 7s. You'll see that on your 2s there are 5 major 2s and only 2 minor 2s. So you could assume that what you have to memorize is that everything's a major 2 with the exception of your Phrygian and Locrian mode. They'll be minor 2s. And likewise, your 7s, the majority of your 7s will be minor 7s. 5 of them are minor 7s, and only 2 of them are major 7s. So you could assume that all of your 7s are minor 7s with the exception of the Ionian mode and the Lydian mode. So to practice your 2s, just think of all 2s being major 2s. So from your root, the minor 2 is a half step, the major 2 is a whole step. So it'll sound like, so root, major 2. Now remember, all of the 2s are major 2s with the exception of the Phrygian mode and the Locrian mode. So, knowing that, you can practice 1, major 2, 1, major 2, 1, minor 2, 1, major 2, 1, major 2, 1, major 2, 1, minor 2, and back to 1, major 2 on your Ionian mode. So it was Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and back to Ionian. So now let's look at the 7s. The 7s are much easier to see as they relate to the octave than they are to the 1. So if you start off by playing a 1 and an octave, your major 7 is just a half step flat of the octave, and your minor 7 is a half step flat of that, or 2 half steps or a whole step from the octave. So all of your 7s in this case will be minor 7s, with the exception being Ionian and Lydian. So the first mode is Ionian, major 7, Dorian, minor 7, Phrygian, minor 7, Lydian, is the major 7. Mixolydian has a minor 7. Aeolian, Locrian, and then ending back on the Ionian. So just as we had an exercise for our 4s and 5s, we'll do the same thing with our 2s and the 7s. And this time we'll play them together harmonically, and it's actually kind of musical this way. So if you on your Ionian, play your 1 an octave, and then play your major 7 and your major 2 together. Okay? On your Dorian, play your octaves. This time it'll be a minor 7 and a major 2. On your Phrygian, play your octaves. This time the 2 is going to be a minor 2, and that 7's still a minor 7. Then on your Lydian is where you're going to have the major 7 and a major 2. Mixolydian will have the minor 7 and a major 2. Aeolian will have the minor 7 and major 2. Locrian will have the minor 7 and the minor 2. And then ending on Ionian. So playing that all together will sound like. Last but not least, we need to take a look at our 3s and our 6s. The 3s are pretty easy to memorize because your 3 major modes, Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian, have major thirds, and all the rest have minor thirds. Same thing goes for your 6s, but this time they're just not quite as easy to remember. I like to think of my major 6s as being part of all of the major modes, the Ionian, the Lydian, and the Mixolydian, with the addition of Dorian. So 3s and 6s are not going to be as easy to memorize. Well, the 3s will be pretty simple. The 6s are probably the ones that'll take the little bit most to memorize. As you see, there's an even mix of these, but the 3s being related, the major 3s being related to the 3 major modes makes that pretty darn easy. So let's look at that on the guitar. So let's start with the 3s, since they're the simplest, really, because every chord is either major or minor by the quality of that third. And remember I said if you focus on your 3 major chords having a major third, and we'll play these harmonically as well. So on your Ionian and your Lydian and your Mixolydian, they'll all be major thirds. The rest will all be minor thirds. So on the 1 chord, or the Ionian, major third. The 2 chord, or Dorian, is a minor third. The 3 chord, or Phrygian, is a minor third. Your 4 chord, or Lydian, is major third. Your 5 chord, or Mixolydian, is a major third. Your 6 chord, or Aeolian, is going to be a minor 3. Your 7 chord, or Locrian, will be a minor 3. And then ending back on the 1, or Ionian. And together that sounds like. Your 6s, while not quite as easy to memorize as your 3s, remember all the major modes have a major 6. So if you consider the Ionian, the Lydian, and Mixolydian as having major 6s, and just remember the 2 chord, or the second mode being Dorian, also has a major 6, then the rest you can play as minor 6s. So, Ionian, there's the 6. Dorian, major 6. Phrygian is going to have a minor 6. But back to Lydian, we'll play a major 6. Mixolydian has the major 6. Now the rest are going to be minor 6s. Aeolian, minor 6. Locrian, minor 6. Ending on Ionian. So again, that'll sound like. So there you have all of the qualities of all of the intervals of all of the modes. Now I only played those on strings 4, 5, and 6, but knowing your octaves, you should be able to work that out. But if you try to recognize within any chord progression a chord function, whether it's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, or 7, God forbid, chord in the song, you'll know the appropriate intervals that you can play. You might just add those to a pentatonic scale to fill it out, or just think entirely in terms of the intervals of those modes. So hopefully that was helpful. If you need a copy of that chart, just send me a message and I'll be glad to email it to you in a PDF. Thanks.